Hey guys, Mr. Irving again. So we're going to jump in now with our part 2 of our lecture about Chapter 30, America in World War I. So last time we talked about Wilson and declaring war, the challenges to him declaring war, and him actually declaring war. What are all the factors that go into it? However, declaring war is the easy part. After declaring war, there's 3 critical sectors to American society we had to mobilize before we can go to war. Those are going to be the economy. We have to mobilize the economy to switch from a peacetime to a wartime economy. We have to mobilize the people. People are largely isolationist. A lot of people argue World War I is one of our most unpopular wars. So it's going to take a lot to convince them to go to war. And also we have to mobilize the army. So we're going to talk about those 3 things today. First off, let's talk about mobilizing the people, that first of those 3 elements. Now, as we said, the people, largely isolationist. A large chunk of the American society was German or was Irish, had no big urgency to ally ourselves with the Allied powers. They wanted to stay isolationist, thought this war was a European affair, didn't want to get involved. However, Wilson's now declared us in war, so now we've got to get the people into it. The government organization is going to be in charge of that. It's going to be called the Creel Committee, or more commonly, the CPI, the Committee on or of Public Information. So they're called the Creel Committee because the guy in charge is named George Creel. So the Creel Committee, their job, convince the American people we should be in this war, and tell them why. It's like when we talked about the Declaration of Independence. When the Second Continental Congress declared independence on July 2nd, 1776, they vote, we're now apart from England, we are apart from Great Britain, we are going to go our own way. Okay, so the government is taking this action. How are you going to explain that to the people? What reasons are you going to give? That's why we had the Declaration of Independence ratified on July 4th. It's published, read to the people. This is why your government did this. The Creel Committee basically has that job for World War I. Explain to the people why you decided we needed to declare war on Germany when we've been isolationists for the first 3 years of this conflict. So it's a tough task, but they're going to get it done. Now, the Creel Committee is going to have a couple tools at their disposal they're going to use more commonly. First up is propaganda. They're going to use a lot of propaganda. The propaganda is going to be in the forms of posters, like that Wake Up America poster in your slideshow. They're also going to use editorials in papers, explaining that the Germans are the bad guys, and these are the reasons we should be against the Germans. They're also going to use leaflets that they will distribute. And also they'll take advantage of a new technology, movies. Movies are starting to get more popular right now in American culture. So the U.S. government will make movies explaining their reasons why the Germans are bad, the Americans should join in, these victorious American soldiers that saved the day. People come out of the movie theater after seeing the movies and think, I'm really proud to be American. America should be involved in this war. So the government is using all the new available technology to push their message onto the people through propaganda. They will also use something called the 4-minute men. These are going to be thousands and thousands of men who will travel the country and make speeches at an average of about 4 minutes long, explaining this is why America joined the war, and this is why you should support America joining the war. And if you're a regular, everyday American living in your city, wherever in the United States, and you hear this speech over and over and over again, eventually it starts to sink in, and you start to think, you know what? The government's right. We should be in this war. The Germans have gone too far. They've invaded neutral Belgium. They may have supported the Austro-Hungarians when they issued the blank check. So therefore, we're anti-Germany. I support this. So through the CPI, we start to convince the American people this war was a good, just war for America to enter. And it was estimated that the 4-Minute Men, over the course of their careers, wrong word, but their employment in this job, they gave millions of speeches that will be heard by millions of people. So they're going to be pretty effective. You can only hear something for so long before it starts to sink in. Now, something that's going to help the Creel Committee get their message out to the American people about why we should join this war is this anti-German hysteria that's also sweeping the country. Now, hysteria, you remember, is an emotion that comes from fear. If you're scared of something, if you're really scared of something, it can make you do wild stuff. A lot of people, once the Creel Committee paints Germany as the bad guy, remember Wilson, when he declared war, painted Germany as doing all these terrible things. They are sinking our boats, invading our freedom of the seas. We have to make the world safe for democracy because of them. People start turning on Germans, and a large segment of American society is German. So, if you were German, all of a sudden you have to fear, I might lose my job. I might lose my house. My kids might be messed with at school just because of their German name. So all kinds of unfair things are going to happen to German Americans just because of their heritage. There's rumors going around that Germans were constantly spying on Americans. We're going to make parallels to this to when we get to World War II, talking about the Japanese in the United States. We paint Japan as the ultimate enemy. Now, all of a sudden, no one trusts the Japanese people that are already here. We start to paint them as the bad guys. But we'll get to that later on this year. So, we start to fear the Germans. Some German Americans are even attacked because of their heritage, not because of anything they actually did. There's even reports of some being tarred, feathered, beaten. One was even lynched that we know of. So it's not a good time to be German in America, just because of this anti-German hysteria sweeping the nation. Some orchestras absolutely stopped playing German music. So some of the German composers were the best we've ever had. Tough. That music is out, because that is now the enemy music. Same way, colleges stopped teaching German language classes. This is the language of the enemy. Why would we want to teach this here? We should teach just more English. Only a traitor or a spy would want to learn German. So languages take a hit. And even food. Everyone loves food in America. Food takes a hit. If you're a German-inspired food, if you're named after something in Germany, we're going to rename you because we don't want to have German influence in American society. So the hamburger, you might think, what's more American than hamburger? Well, hamburger is actually a German word. So we're going to rename hamburger and call it the Liberty Steak. Sauerkraut will become Freedom Cabbage or Liberty Cabbage. Stupid names that make no sense. But people feel compelled, we need to get rid of everything German. We're going to discriminate against German things in American society. So that's going to help the American people mobilize against this war. Going from isolationists to deciding, hey, there is a really bad guy out there. We're going to hate this bad guy, and now we're going to support this war. However, even though we have now this clear bad guy, there's still plenty of people that are against this war. And they're going to speak out and say, this war is dumb. We shouldn't be doing this. So we have to have laws that are going to restrict civil liberties. In times of war in U.S. history, all the way back to the Civil War and even the American Revolution, your civil liberties are going to take a hit when the national interest is at stake. So if the government decides we're at war, that war trumps everything else, your First Amendment rights, your freedom of speech, your Fifth Amendment rights, rights to not incriminate yourself in court, rights to due process, those are going to take a back seat. So Wilson is going to go along with this. He's going to ask the Congress for laws to restrict civil liberties. He's not the only U.S. president to do that, but he's going to be one more in the chain that's going to say, civil liberties are important, but if we're at war, the national interest trumps individual interest. So there's no I in team. The team's at war, your individual rights take a backseat. So, Congress is going to give some new laws to the president to use. One of the most famous is the Espionage Act of 1917. And just that word, espionage, makes you think of spies, and that's what the war, or this new law, is going to be about. The Espionage Act is going to ban anyone from doing anything that can be seen as aiding the enemy, sabotaging the American cause, doing something that would obstruct the draft. We're going to talk about the draft later. But doing something that would get in the way of the draft, so hurt the American military effort. If you were to do something like that, you could be prosecuted under this new Espionage Act. If you found guilty of that, you could go to jail. You could even be put to death. So, don't mess with the American war effort or sabotage something American in the time of war, or else. The Congress is also going to pass the Sedition Act in 1918. Now, Sedition Act, you probably remember that term from last year. We've had a Sedition Act before in the United States. Basically, the Sedition Act of 1918, similar to the last Sedition Act we talked about last year. If you are critical of the government, or the flag, or government officials, if you say, Wilson is crazy, he doesn't know what he's doing, the war is dumb, now all of a sudden that's illegal. If you violate the Sedition Act, you're going to jail. So pretty raw deal. There's going to be two very famous men that are prosecuted under this law. Grand total, there's almost 2,000 men. 1,900 men are prosecuted under the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act combined. The most famous is going to be Eugene Debs. Eugene Debs we've talked about in class before. Socialist leader. He runs for president several times. In the last election we talked about, he got over 1 million votes. He speaks out against the war. He thinks this is a war about capitalism. He's against the war and makes a strong stance against that. And he's going to make public speeches declaring his position against the war. So he's in violation of the Sedition Act. He's spoken out against the war. That's now illegal. He's going to be tried or prosecuted, found guilty, sentenced to 10 years in jail in Atlanta in a federal prison or penitentiary. Now, he won't serve the whole time. He'll be let out by the next president. He'll be pardoned. But the arrest of Eugene Debs shows who's going to be the real target of these laws. They're going to focus on socialists. They're going to focus on union members. They're going to focus on political radicals that are kind of going against the war. If you're a pacifist and you say, I'm anti-all wars, you might end up in jail, depending on your beliefs. Now, besides Eugene Debs, a guy named Schnick, or Schenk, depending on your pronunciation. It's a German name. He's also going to be arrested. He's going to be arrested because he is a pacifist. He's also a socialist. He's a socialist of the Socialist Party in the United States. He gets arrested because he produces a pamphlet. And that pamphlet is going to be anti the draft. I see the picture is frozen. I don't know if it's still recording or not. I'll keep talking. Schenk violates this law. So he published his pamphlet against the draft, and he's going to publish it. Well, if you are anti the draft, you're in violation of the Espionage Act. That's no good. So he's going to be prosecuted, found guilty. You violated the Espionage Act. He says, that's a crappy deal. I'm clearly within my First Amendment rights of freedom of speech. This should be an open and shut case. This law is a bad law. It violates my freedom of speech. It should be thrown out. It's going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is going to look at it in Schenk versus the U.S., and they're going to decide, sure, civil liberties are important. However, you violated this law. Your freedom of speech does not trump the national interest. Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the opinion for the majority, and he said, if your speech presents a clear and present danger to the United States, that's the precedent he sets, then that speech is not protected. The analogy he gives is, let's say you're in a crowded theater, and there is no emergency, but you yell, fire. All of a sudden, people could be trampled, people could be hurt, trying to get to an exit and not be able to escape. Now, you've injured people for no reason. You've hurt people, put them in harm's way falsely. Therefore, that speech of yelling fire is not protected. That shouldn't be. You've presented a danger to the people of the United States. Schneck does the same thing, the court argues. By being against the draft, you've hurt our war effort, you've put more people in danger. So therefore, that speech is not protected. So controversial decision is not going to be overturned until the 1960s, the late in the 1960s. But speech is going to be a very controversial thing going forward in U.S. history. Now we've prepared the people for a mobilization of war. The screen still seems frozen. I hope it's not really. We'll see. On my end, it looks frozen. But let's talk about the economy. What's the deal with the economy? Because we have to prepare the economy for war. The economy's never been tested in the way it will be in World War I. In the past, the government's kind of taken a back seat. Said, let the market sort things out. The government's going to be more laissez-faire, keep its hand off the economy. But World War I and the massive scale of World War I changes everything. Now we need a heavy-handed hand in government. We need the government to produce more, because not only are we switching and producing everything for the war effort, for us, but for all of the allies. There's over 100 nations joining the Allied powers. We need to make everything we need for the war as the United States, but also everything France needs, Britain needs, everybody else. So it's an enormous task logistically. And the government decides the best way to do this is to take a heavier hand in the economy. The first government organization is going to tackle this task. It's going to be called the War Industries Board. Now, the War Industries Board basically controls resources. So, depending on what your business does and how important it is for the war, that's how many resources you're going to get. Let's say you make guns, or you make tanks, or you make something that's directly related. You're going to get all the resources you need because your business is very important to the war effort. The government's probably buying stuff from your company. However, if you are not important to the war effort, let's say you make tennis balls, or tennis rackets, or ping pong balls, something that doesn't matter for the war, you're going to get less resources because the national focus is on the war, not on consumer products that don't help the war effort. So they're going to coordinate the purchase activities for us as well as for all the allies. Not only what do we need for the war, but what does France need? What do the rest of the allies need? Now, the War Industries Board is also going to regulate prices, so they're going to price fix. They do that because they try to keep inflation from getting out of control. When a war happens, it's very common for inflation to get kind of crazy. They want to try to avoid that if they can. Now, another body that's going to be created is the National War Labor Board. This is going to be created out of necessity, because even though the WIB tries to control prices, they won't be successful, and inflation will rise. Now, because inflation is rising, that means prices are going up. Workers in the United States are able to purchase less with their dollar. They get mad, so they start to use the main tool workers have to protest what they think is an unfair system of their wages are not going up, but their prices are. They're going to go on strike. A record number of strikes happened during World War I. Over 6,000 strikes happened just in the United States during World War I. Now, normally, that would be a private matter. The company deals with the strike the way they will, but now we're in a war. So a private company strike all of a sudden affects the war movement. So let's say a company that makes bullets goes on strike. Now all of a sudden we're not getting bullets. And the U.S. has to function with less of what it needs. It doesn't want that. It wants to eliminate strikes. So they're going to create the National War Labor Board. They're going to put William Howard Taft, our old friend, former progressive president, to be head of the National War Labor Board. And their job is basically work with companies to reduce the amount of strikes. They're going to promote progressive reforms to try to keep those strikes from happening. Things like a reduced hour workday. Don't make your workers work 12 hours. Let them work 8 hours. Give them higher pay. Maybe even let them unionize. Let them do things that are going to help them be happier, get better conditions, better pay, to keep strikes from happening. So they're going to be semi-successful in reducing strikes. The slogan, of the National War Labor Board will be, labor will win the war. Try to convince people they have a stake in this war. If they believe what they're doing is helping the war effort, and you've done a good job of convincing them that the war is important, then they're going to participate, and it'll all work out. The last thing that's going to help prepare the U.S. economy for war is going to be the work-fight rule of 1918. Now, this is going to be kind of a sketchy rule. This is going to be a rule issued by the War Department, and it's going to say, basically, if you are an unemployed male, you jump to the front of the line of the draft. So if you're not working, you can be drafted. Now, if you go on strike, you obviously are not working anymore. So this is incentive or motivation to not go on strike. If, let's say, you're unhappy with your wage in the gun factory, tough. Working in the gun factory and being able to still provide for your family, or at least see your family every night when you come home, is better than being drafted and sent to go fight in the trenches in France. So the work or fight rule is going to give an incentive for a lot of workers to just basically accept their poor conditions and deal with it and not go on strike. So this is a very heavy-handed law by the government, but will be pretty effective after implemented in preventing further strikes. Now, there will be further strikes, but there would have been probably more without the work or fight rule issued. Last slide that we need to talk about in terms of mobilizing the economy for war is going to be African Americans during the war. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about African American experience during World War I, but right now I want to talk about specifically the Great Migration. Now, last year we spent a lot of time about the Civil War and Reconstruction and the African American experience in the country. And if you remember, the majority of African Americans are still in the South after the Civil War. Why? Because they can't afford to move. This system is set up to keep them where they are. We still need them to work in these agrarian jobs in the South, either harvesting cotton or other cash crops. Well, all of a sudden, let's fast forward 50 years. World War I is starting to break out. Now, all of a sudden, there's these war industries opening up in the Northeast, the Midwest, even some factories out west. And now, all of a sudden, African Americans are thinking, you know what? Our experience, our life in the South has not been great. There's the Jim Crow laws. We are treated unfairly. We have jobs, but we're not really getting anywhere. We're not moving upwardly in society. So it might be better to just start over somewhere else. What about these factory jobs that are appearing in the North? What if we take one of those? We can move our whole family there, work in a bullet factory or gun factory or whatever, and make a better life for ourselves. So this is what's going to spur what we call the Great Migration. And the Great Migration is a period from 1915 or 1916 through 1930. Historians debate about the years of the Great Migration. But during this period, millions of African Americans, and some poor whites, but mainly African Americans, will leave the South and resettle in urban centers around the country. So your Chicagos, your New Yorks, Detroit, Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Boston, Philadelphia. African Americans are going to move from the South to take these jobs in these new factories in the North. Now, when they move, that's going to cause racial tensions. It's not their fault. But there's racism everywhere. It wasn't enclosed just in the South. So the North still had plenty of people racist towards African Americans. Now all of a sudden this influx of thousands or hundreds of thousands of African Americans to their city is going to create tensions, competition for jobs, anger. And that's going to lead, that fear and that anger, to race riots. Race riots are going to break out all over the country. It was especially bad during the summer of 1919, what we call the Red Summer. The Red Summer is a series of race riots. They're going to last mainly into the summer, but even into the fall, of over 30 race riots that break out across the country, from Charleston all the way up to New York, Chicago, every major city you can think of. The worst of which happens in Chicago with a really bad race riot. It's going to last for days with dozens of people injured and dozens of people killed and hundreds injured. In the Red Summer alone, we have hundreds of people killed, both black and white, and thousands injured, if you combine all of those riots together. So this is a period of incredible instability racially in the United States. People are moving, it's making a major democratic shift. And in class, we actually are going to listen to an interview with one African American man who moved from Jacksonville, Florida, up into the north, and he'll tell us about his experience and whether things got better or got worse. Now, that's probably a good stopping point for today, but I'll see y'all later.